Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric. Today, I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Mackenzie.
Hello.
And Alex.
I'm here.
We're all here. On today's episode, they're not here right now, but, through the magic of technology, they will be soon. We are joined by the newcomers. It's a couple who's been struggling with infertility. Alex and Rachel, you got to sit down with them and kind of have an in-depth conversation about their story, and it is a bit of a taboo subject, so you kind of get in depth with what it looks like.
Well, without any further ado, we have right here in the flesh Russ and Diane, which surprisingly Rachel was just sharing with us a fun random fact about both of you.
Yeah, that's my parents' names, so it's kind of weird. I feel like homesick now because I'm just like with my
parents.
We kind of have older names.
Yeah.
There aren't many Dianes my age.
Yeah. Is your full name Russell?
I refuse to answer that question.
His full name's Russell.
Okay.
Wow. She called him out. Someone wanted to know my full name, and I'm not telling it on here either. So this isn't about me. This is about both of you. Both members of CCC have been going here, and it makes us happy that you actually listen to our podcast.
Yes, we do.
Yes, thanks for listening. So we always have a question for guests, and so we wrestled through, do we ask you all these same questions, or do we switch them up this week? And we decided to ask you the same questions, okay? For listening, that's your reward for knowing what the questions are. But either way, we're going to ask the question. So first question, and we'll have Diane answer first, and then Russ, you can jump in. Nickname. Have you ever had a nickname? If so, what is it?
My mom has always called me Millie.
Okay.
There's no reason to it. She just calls me Millie.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good.
Interesting.
Russ?
My nickname is technically Russ, as earlier revealed.
Okay. So you go by Russ, and that's your nickname. Okay. Second question. If you had a warning label, what would it be?
Unfiltered.
Unfiltered.
Yes. Usually whatever I'm thinking is on my face or comes out of my mouth, and it isn't really filtered very much.
Okay, so we're in for a treat today.
Yeah, it's going to be a real treat.
Uncomfortable and unfiltered today.
There you go.
Yep. Good.
There you go. How about you, Russ?
Mine would have to be reads books to children in strange voices.
Okay. And do you both agree with that, like your warning labels? Do you think she's pretty unfiltered?
Oh, he definitely does. It really annoys me sometimes.
Okay.
I would have used one of the voices to do my warning label, but it was going to make Diane uncomfortable.
Okay. And unfiltered. Okay. And lastly, what's the last book you read? And we try not to like over Jesus juke this. So if it's just if it's the Bible, that's okay. But anything outside of that, we know you're great, faithful Christians in the Word every day. So what's the last book you read?
A book on tractors.
A book on tractors. Is there a title?
I think it was Tractors.
Okay.
It was a board book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I may or may not have listened to Dallas Willard's Hearing God on the way here so that I could have a adult answer.
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Funny.
We will count that. Well, thanks for answering those questions. But we are here today to talk maybe about a subject that's not quite as light as those things. We've had, since we've been doing the podcast and asking for people for feedback, a lot of people actually request us having this conversation because I think it's maybe a taboo inside of the church, and it's one of those things. But we're going to be talking about infertility today. And so both of you have decided to come and share your story a little bit. And so we'd love to get to know, I guess, just jump right in and get to know that part of your story. That's why you're here. I know you lead a ministry and have done great ministry around this, and that's part of your story. So we'd just love for either of you to dive in and share with us that story.
Yeah, we were married in 2010, and we decided to kind of hold off on having kids and we wanted to wait for about a year. And so then at the end of 2011, kind of early 2012, we started trying. And then like at the start, it just kind of like, oh, we're going to get pregnant, like 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. Then it became 4 months. Then it was 6 months and then 9 months. And you're just trying to say, do I go into the doctor? Do I not go into the doctor? Do we have a problem going on here? So we decided to go see a doctor, and they pretty much said, no, we don't really know what's going on. You can have an exploratory surgery. That would cost, I think it was about 20 grand.
Yeah, it was about 20,000.
Wow.
And it wouldn't really tell us anything. I mean, it could tell us if I had a disease, but then it wouldn't really answer like if we could get pregnant or not. And so we decided not to go down that route to have a surgery. But we went to, here in Omaha, there's a really great resource called Pope Paul VI Institute. And they do natural family planning and a charting method. And so we started taking the charting classes, and it just told a lot more about like my body and my health, and kind of revealed just some clues about what was going on with my body. So that was really helpful, but it was super, super stressful, because kind of like every time you went to the bathroom, you had to be aware of your fertility. So then that's just so many times a day that you're thinking about it. And then like we'd have to chart it, and we both helped each other. Like he would write down the charting results every night, which was super helpful, but it just became really, really a stressful time. And it was just like a hard time, I think, making medical decisions. Because you have to decide, like, am I going to go down the medical route? Am I going to go down a natural route? Am I going to take supplements? What do we want to do? And it really just plays into your faith. Like, how much faith do I want to have in medicine? How much do I want to have in just God being able to answer my prayers? And it was just really a hard time to sort out.
Yeah, and I want to jump in. So we did a couple series of tests, discovered that our infertility seems to be related to both of us. So it's not just her, it's not just me, it's our great combination together. And I think, too, we should talk about the definition of infertility in case somebody hasn't.
Thanks.
So the medical definition, I'm reading it here: infertility is trying to conceive for 1 year without becoming pregnant. After the age of 35, it is trying to conceive for 6 months.
Okay.
And some statistics are that 1 in 8 couples have dealt with or face infertility. A third of the cause is male-related, a third of the cause is female-related, and a third of the cause is marked as unknown. So just don't know why it's not happening for people.
So I feel like another thing that plays into this is like you guys are married, and so this is going to take kind of maybe a toll on your marriage, and it can make it a little bit more difficult. It's already kind of, you're working together and living together, but throwing in something like infertility probably makes it a little more tough on your marriage. How did you guys kind of respond in your marriage when you were going through this?
One of the things that we did was like I mentioned before, we tried to share the load as much as we could. So with the charting, Russ was able to help with that. So all the burden wasn't on me. So I feel like as the woman, you feel like a ton of this burden is on you. And we tried to find different ways that Russ could support me in that. And then another thing that we did was every Tuesday night we checked in. So it wasn't like hey, let's just check in whenever we want to. It was a defined day, a defined time that we had, that we knew we were going to talk about it. And if we wanted to talk about it other times, it was always open on the table, but there was that defined time that we were able to talk about it.
Awesome.
And that was really helpful, because it let us have space where if something came up that we didn't have to talk about right away, but we knew we wanted to talk about, it wasn't now you have to try to schedule an awkward conversation. Now you have to say, hey, I want to talk about something, but not right now. We could have a defined time. We knew this is when we were going to talk about it. And you could also be mentally prepared to discuss what's going on at that time.
Yeah, I think that's wise and great counsel for someone who maybe is going through this currently in their own marriage and trying to figure out because it is an awkward thing. Even like you're married, I've been married for 10 years. You guys have too. There's still awkward conversations you walk into, and you're like, who's going to start it? How's it going to go? And so, yeah, that's a great piece of advice. And so, now Diane, you lead a ministry here at the church, and we'll get into some more questions, but what kind of led you to leading a ministry that's targeted towards, women? Or just tell us maybe what it's targeted towards, why you started it, and how it all became.
Yeah, so going through infertility, I found that there weren't a whole lot of people that you could talk with. And I just looked at the renewal groups here at church, and I said, why so many people are going through this? If it's 1 in 8, why isn't there a group for this? And so I went to the staff here, and they were like, absolutely, you can start the group. And I really feel like if you say, hey, why isn't something happening? You can go and be that person that does it. And so I'm not going to say I feel super equipped to lead it, but I'm someone who's willing to lead it and have experience. And so we are just kind of a small group of married women who get together, and really we're like a peer support group that just processes. We just pretty much open up the floor and say, hey, who wants to share? And you can share anything that's on your heart. If it's a medical thing you're going through, it's something you're going through with your marriage, if it's something you're going through with your faith. And these ladies are just warriors. They are warriors in the faith. And I have been so encouraged by the wrestling that they've done and coming out and saying on the other side, God is still faithful. God is still good. Even though we throw out so many questions that we have about what God's doing, that we can still encourage each other and say, yeah, God's still faithful.
That's good.
That's really interesting that you bring that up. I'm sure when you're going through something like this, it is you kind of start to question God and what his plan is in this and what he's doing. What are some of the kind of faith struggles that you guys had as you were going through this this infertility?
Yeah.
I think one of them is why did God call us to get married if he's not going to give us children? Because the Bible is pretty clear that childbearing is one of the functions of marriage. And so if he's called us to this, but then he's not giving us children, why is he doing that? I think one of the other ones is you're really wondering, anybody with a physical problem, why did God create me this way? Why is this what God has given me to walk through? So I think those are two of the real questions that I wrestled through.
Yeah, I think what kind of sums it up for me, which Russ says that I interpret this song differently than other people do, but I just hate the song It Is Well. Because deep within me, going through this experience, I just cannot get to the point where I say, it's well. It's not well with me that my body is broken. And I know that ultimately it's because of the fall and taking it back to the fall and sin, and that we live in a broken world. But I just really struggled with getting to the point where I could say it's well. And so then whenever the song's sung at church, I always sing God is good all the time. So if you're around me, you will never hear me singing It Is Well. I just can proclaim that God is good all the time. And I think that's the place that I came to with my faith through this.
Yeah. And I even think of, a couple weeks ago on the podcast, we had Tony here talking about, the topic of abortion and, people that are having the opportunity that are pregnant and thinking, hey, I don't want this baby. It doesn't fit my lifestyle. And I think even from that side of things, how do things like that, sit with you as you're processing through this yourselves? You're like, I would give anything, there's a lot of money we're giving, a lot of time investment, all of that kind of stuff. I guess where does just thinking about those types of things fit into your narrative as you're in your faith and shaping all of that as you're journeying through this?
Yeah, that is definitely a question that you ask yourself. You say, why can this person have a one-night stand and, get somebody pregnant and have kids? You really start to wonder, why does God allow people that are irresponsible or people that are in difficult economic situations to have kids when we are in a great economic situation and are, I think, relatively responsible people? So yeah, there's a lot of those questions that you feel bad about even thinking that. You feel bad about thinking, why did this teenage girl get pregnant? But it is something that you have to work through and wonder.
Yeah.
I think that you can also, if you start going down those paths, get a lot of bitterness built up in your heart. And I found that it's easier to just talk about it and talk about it with each other, or talk about it with girlfriends and say, I just don't understand why this has happened. Like, why can someone else get pregnant and I can't? And then you're able to let that bitterness go a whole lot easier than just kind of rehearsing it through your mind over and over and over again.
Right. Yeah. I think that's so huge that you guys are so willing to share like your inner thoughts and things that are going on that are maybe you're like, oh, I feel kind of bad for thinking this. But like, I think sometimes that's what Satan wants us to do, is just get in our own head and not put things in like out in the light. And so I think that's a huge reason why we want to do this podcast, is because we want this to be something that people feel like they can talk about and share and get out in the open, because that's really, in community, God can do a lot of work there. So I think that's powerful.
Yeah. And so there was another term we defined, infertility in general, but another term that, as I was sitting with you guys and processing this, and even stories of maybe people that you're ministering to in your group, one that I was just I've heard of, but was kind of ignorant to, like, why it would affect people the way it does, is secondary infertility, and so I think this is a big part of people's stories. And some, so you've got infertility, problem, obviously having a first kid, and then there's probably some people that are like, okay, you have your first kid, but what's secondary infertility? What's that look like? Why is there a struggle, as you've talked to people and maybe experienced it yourself? Why is that a thing?
Yeah, secondary infertility is when you can have one child and then you go through infertility again with having a second child or even a third child. I think part of the emotions with it are you just feel so bad that you want a second child sometimes, because you're like, I already got one miracle. I have one child, but for your family, you might still want to have more children. And so it's a big wrestling, I think, for a lot of people who go through secondary infertility, feeling like this guilt of, I already have one. Some people can't even have one kid. And now I feel like I really want to have another kid, and just kind of trying to wrestle that out.
Yeah, and I think we can do this throughout our conversation. But are there pointers you would give to somebody that maybe that's the case? I think sometimes we maybe don't feel as bad for that person, in society, because externally we can look and be like, what are you complaining about? You have a child, God gave you a miracle, as you said, but to be inside of that person's feelings that maybe is wrestling with secondary infertility, what are some ways to shepherd people in that conversations, things to not say, practical tips for somebody who maybe that's their experience and they're really in pain over secondary infertility? Can you help us learn from that?
I mean, I think not saying you already have one kid, why you want another one, really is a good tip.
Yeah.
But I think too, there are other ways that you can convey that same sentiment to people that is not helpful. Okay. So maybe like saying, at
the park, just random people will be like, oh, when are you going to have another? We're just like, I don't know you. Why are you talking to me at the park about having more kids?
Yeah, that's good.
Well, and people probably assume since you already had one, then it should be easy for you to have a second one too. And just making those assumptions and asking that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had people ask me, would you want to try for a child of this gender? And it's hard to bite back the really snarky responses that can come out of that.
Yeah. So I think those things are helpful. And so you are both obviously opposite genders, and how men and women just respond and our feelings are very different. And so as you're going through this, and most of it's happening like in your body, Diane, and even though you both found out, hey, maybe there's issues that we're both, causing or bringing to the table around this, what are like the feelings that both of you are having in the middle of like infertility, and how are they the same? How are they different, just being a man and a woman? Because that's part of why we wanted to have you on here, Russ, is to provide that, because we have a ministry right now for women, and we want people to know about it. But really, I think men don't talk about it even more. If it's taboo for women, it's really, really taboo for men. And so I'd love to hear how both of you are processing it, the feelings happening inside of your hearts, inside of you as you're dealing with this. And you've shared a little bit about the emotions, but would love to hear even more.
I mean, I think for me, as a guy, there's a lot of questions of physical. Does this mean I'm not really a man if I can't have a child? Does this mean that, my family name is going to end? What does it mean? I think there's also questions about the marriage. Like I said, I never struggled with this, but I know that in a lot of cases, infertility can cause a lot of problems in the marriage because the guy says, well, it's not my fault we can't have kids. It's your fault. And that can obviously lead to a lot of conflict, divorce, even if not divorce, just a lot of problems that people can have. And so I think as a guy also, you struggle with the idea of if I can't have kids, does that mean that everything that I do here is just going to end when I am done? You feel like if I have kids, life will carry on, I'll have a legacy, but if you don't have kids, maybe you don't have as much of a legacy. I think it's also, like you said, men don't talk about this, so it's hard to have conversations with other guys about, we can't have kids. And people that can have kids sometimes, because they haven't experienced it or don't know what to say, you get a lot of awkward jokes or comments. So it can be really pretty isolating as well.
Yeah, thanks.
I feel like on the women's side, I feel like it's like a hope coaster. So you get up all of this hope and you're like, okay, we're going to get pregnant this month. And then you wait 2 weeks and you find out that you're not pregnant. And then you just are really emotional that time anyway. And you add on finding out that you're not pregnant. And then it's just kind of always in the back of your mind. And just think of like month after month after month. Every 2 weeks, your hopes are up, your hopes are dashed, your hopes are up, your hopes are dashed. And it just takes a huge toll on you as a woman. And I think already just having emotional, just a lot of emotions come around that time of the month and throughout the month.
Right.
So I think that's more on the women's side.
Well, and in some of that information, it's like some of the similar symptoms that you have normally in your time of the month can also be pregnancy symptoms. So like the whole 2 weeks that you're waiting, you're like, oh, is that? Oh, maybe just like matching those symptoms up together. I'm sure that it's just
you can start to go crazy.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing, as a guy who doesn't have the hormonal occurrences going on in my body and I can't tell, it was really valuable for me to understand through doing the charting what was going on with Diane. And so I could tell what she was dealing with hormonally and physically that would lead to emotions and things that she couldn't control that I had to know how to respond to.
Yeah. And so not just a legacy and not just like a family planning in your name, but I would assume this takes over a huge chunk of your life when you're spending this much time thinking about it on the hope coaster as you're thinking about what am I going to do? How do I even enter conversations? How do we spend money? What do we prepare for? What kind of house do we get? All those kind of things. Can you share maybe how more than just in more ways than one, it can take over your life or take over someone's life that's going through this that maybe people just don't know and don't have empathy for?
Yeah, so I'm a type 1 on the Enneagram, which is the perfectionist, and I'm a firstborn. So I'm like, I want to take charge of this. I want to see how I can try to control it. So with ours, I was on a lot of supplements. We were on chiropractic care. We did exercise. We got all the chemicals out of our house. We changed our skillets because the Teflon might get you. And then we put blackout curtains on our windows because I read somewhere that if you have blackout curtains for part of the month and then you let it up and you let the moon shine in, then maybe you'll get pregnant that month. And so just kind of like all the things that you can find on the internet that you're like, oh, maybe this will work. Maybe this will work. And then just like career wise, I was like, well, am I going to stay at home and be a mom? I have no idea if that's going to happen. So we decided that I'd go back and get my master's, which really wasn't in the plan, but it was like, I guess I've got this time. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with it. And just trying to figure out like what I do for a career and moving forward.
Yeah, and I like to plan things, so I spent probably far too long spending about half an hour every weekend looking at prices for different cars to figure out if we replace our old cars, do we want to get a minivan? Do we want to get a regular car? We don't have kids. Price differences. I had spreadsheets, and I'm not really a spreadsheet person, figuring out the total cost of if we had a sedan for 2 years and then bought a van or things like that.
Yeah. So it's your diet, it's the large purchases, that like investments, like a car, houses. It's so much of your life just gets taken over by
career, vacations.
And I think the important thing is to note about that is everybody has those decisions that they do have to make. We just have this large, unblockable item that we have to consider in making every single one of those decisions that I think a lot of people, if having kids isn't a problem for you, you're not thinking, okay, do I need this house or do I need this car? You're planning, I'm going to have 3 kids, so I can make plans along that lines.
Yeah, that's good.
I kind of want to bring up, like, in my life stage right now, it's a lot of that kind of pregnancy talk because a lot of my friends, we've been married for a couple of years now, and it's like, for some reason, the 2-year, like, mark is just like, all right, when are you having babies? Like, that just comes up a lot with just your friends and family. How do you recommend people who maybe aren't struggling with infertility or just kind of want to ask questions or are curious, like, how do you recommend they either bring up the conversation or kind of engage in that without maybe being offensive? Because I think sometimes you just don't know what people are going through or what they're struggling with, but you want to kind of like engage in their life and get excited about something that might be in the future for them. How would you engage in that conversation, do you think?
I think that if you're like really close to the person, then just go ahead and ask, but don't make it kind of like flippant. Like if it's in a time, like maybe one-on-one, go ahead and ask them and say, hey, are you guys thinking about having kids or how's that going for you? But if it's someone that you don't know really well, you probably just shouldn't say anything because you don't know where they're at. So like if you're going to meet that person, if you're like a greeter somewhere or you're going to meet that person once or twice, I just don't think that it's really appropriate to ask.
That's really good.
Yeah, and for us, it was difficult sometimes to contain snarky responses back to people who would ask questions.
Sometimes we didn't.
Yeah.
And then that just put them in their place. And I think that's fine because like if you're going to make a rude comment, not necessarily rude, but you should be okay with saying, oh, we can't have kids.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh.
Yeah, like for the awkward response at least.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think people really are aware how common, I don't know, I just don't think people are aware of how common it is. And I've noticed even more, I feel like it's even growing more of even a lot of my friends are even struggling with infertility. And so I think as it's becoming more common and more people are talking about it, you kind of have to rewire your brain and how you're entering in those conversations instead of just being like, all right, 2 years, are you guys having kids? Like what's going on? That's just like a normal thing. And I think we have to start thinking differently about it.
And I think over time, like I've just started being a lot more bold. So if somebody starts asking me like, oh, are you going to, like today, I had someone say, oh, are you going to have a 3rd kid? And I was like, well, we have a really hard time getting pregnant. Yeah. So I don't know if that's going to happen or not. And then they didn't really have much else to say. But I think just being open about it makes it less awkward for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, normalizing it. And we live in the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years. There is, our parents didn't announce it on Twitter and Facebook and, have to have the best card and a cute little video and like a proposal type thing just to announce it to the world. And so I think it's become so normative. Like we see it so much everywhere where previously, that didn't happen. Maybe it happened in more natural conversations with people like your friends were actually your friends that you spent time with and your family was your family. But now your social network is so much bigger that it's thrown in your face probably a lot more, like on social media in those types of ways that maybe a generation that wasn't raised on Facebook or wasn't raised with a social network can't understand like the pain and how you see it constantly. It's not just their comment, but it's like their comment coupled with 10 of my friends that went to high school with that are all putting it out there at the same time. And those expectations that are maybe unsaid, but we're creating through this social web of social networking. And so do you have like any tips for what that looks like? And we know that this is your story and your preferences. And so it doesn't represent everybody going through this situation. Different people have different thoughts on what maybe triggers them or what might make them more emotional. But what would you share? Like, are there social media? Because we just live so much of our lives, I guess, on social media, ways that you would help us figure out how do we govern and navigate that personally?
I know that in Hannah's prayer, we've talked about it a lot and just encourage the ladies to say, it's okay to take a break. Like if you're getting too many announcements on here, it's okay to take a break and not be on Facebook for a while or not be wherever you're getting bombarded by it. So I think that would be my advice is that it's just fine to take a break for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And on the other side, I think that sometimes people want to surprise people with birth announcements. And I understand that sentiment, but for us, friends that sent us a text message before a group meeting and said, hey, we're going to announce that, we're pregnant. That was really helpful because we are genuinely happy for people who get pregnant.
Yeah.
But it's that initial, oh, good for you. That if we can process that before you tell everybody else, we will be able to be a lot more joyful and possibly save somebody from some awkward situations. And I say
hurt feelings.
Yeah. I say that as somebody who has seen it from both sides and wants to make sure that nobody has to go through that when they don't have to.
That's so good because I'm like the guy that I love to be creative and think through like how do I put something out there? How do we tell people things, anything in life like that, whether it's babies, kids, anything. I just want people to know about my life maybe and present it in a creative way. And so my wife has been as a female and just more thoughtful about that and has shepherded me in a big way in that. I know in our small group, like there's been times where you just can't not tell people in your small group that you're pregnant at some point. Like it's going to become clear and obvious. And then you're like, what? Oh, you had a baby? You guys sent me a meal train invite? That's weird. So, but she's been great at like saying, hey, we need to like have this conversation because she knows their story and their prayer requests with this couple before we go announce it to those people, just to give them the time to process it. And yeah, like you said, you wear maybe stuff on your your face and your sleeves, and so they might interpret it as like, oh, Diane hates me for being pregnant, and that's not the reality. You don't hate them for that, but it's just how you heard it, and you can't just force yourself to be excited in that moment for them. And so that's good. And I'm grateful that she's helped shepherd me and guide me in that way. So that's important, I think, for people to understand good advice there. Other questions you have, Rachel?
I can't think of anything right now.
So Russ, I know when you and I talked, and we weren't even like planning on having this conversation, it came up as we were getting to know each other. One of the things that you shared was because this is so taboo for men to talk about, I don't remember the full story, so forgive me, but I'm going to ask you to tell it now, and maybe this time I'll memorize it. But you said that you were at like a conference or something.
I was on a web programmer forum.
Okay.
I'm a software developer, and somebody had posted a link to some story on the BBC about infertility rates, and I said in a web forum post said, hey, if anybody is dealing with this, leave a comment or send an email, and I'll try to get you in touch with some resources. And I had, I think, 3 people, just totally random people, send me an email and say, yeah, I'd love to talk about this because we're dealing with this, and nobody, I have no resources, I have no way to talk about it.
Yeah. And I thought that was just powerful, and one way somebody can even invite that conversation and their experience inside of that, and also speaks towards these are total strangers that if they're at that point of desperation that they want to talk to another total stranger from a web forum about it, there's probably a lot more people that aren't having this conversation that are hoping to and would love to and just need somebody to know, man, I feel you, I'm with you, let's walk through this together. And so thanks for doing that. That's a cool way to love people, to have empathy, to minister to people there. Are there other things, that we should talk about, things that that you think people should know, be aware of, having this conversation? One of our biggest hopes is, to say this stuff out loud, to maybe make it a little less awkward for people coming down the line, and to teach us as a church, as God's church, how do we have these conversations with people, and maybe normalize it, because it's normal, it's part of what happens in life. And so are there other things that you think would be really helpful for us to learn, parts of your story, and continue to share, your journey? You alluded to infertility, secondary infertility being a part of it. Someone asked you once if you were going to have a 3rd kid. So share the rest of even your story and how that's unfolded over the last few years.
Yeah. So I think I kind of had 2 other things, and then we can share the rest of our story.
Yeah.
There was a study done in 1992 about the psychological effects of infertility on women, and it came back that the results suggested that the psychological symptoms associated with infertility are similar to those associated with other serious medical conditions like cancer and cardiac rehab. And so just to have the compassion on people who are going through infertility, that it's psychologically the same as someone going through cancer. And I just don't feel like we really think that way. And for cancer, you're like, oh, let me support you so much. And you see pictures on Facebook about people ringing the bell to beat cancer. And I just feel like there's a ton of support, and it's not super taboo. But infertility is super taboo, and we're going through the same psychological effects as people with cancer. So I think that's one thing. And then we both came up with a do, say, and instead say list.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to do the do say, or don't say, the don't say.
You're going to do don't.
I'm going to do don't.
Okay.
Okay. So.
You do. Sorry, that was my middle school ministry time. I had to say it.
Don't say, just relax, or don't be stressed, or have more patience.
Instead, you should say, this is a really hard thing you're going through. Do you want to go to coffee, go to a movie, or do you want to go to on a walk next Tuesday? If you're specific about inviting people, that really shows that you care and can really let them know that you want to help.
That's good.
Don't say, everything happens for a reason, or the Christian version, it'll happen in God's timing.
Instead, you should say, this is a hard season. How can I pray for you? And then pray in that way.
And I think pray right now. So not just how can I pray for you and put it out as this,
thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, thoughts and prayers. But pray for them right there. Don't say, you should adopt. Or I know someone who adopted and then they got pregnant.
Instead, you should say, your identity does not come from having kids. And sorry, that was formatted weird. Really, adoption is something that a lot of people that go through infertility think about, but it is similarly a big decision that they have to make. Adoption and everything around that can be equally traumatic like infertility. And so also, I was thinking of this, and I can hardly think of anybody I know who adopted and then had natural children. It doesn't really happen as frequently as people think.
Yeah. Well, I think that is a big one in the church, because we want to be empathetic, and we know there's kids out there, right, that are looking for loving homes, and sometimes people say that in a good way of like, hey, let me fix your problem for you, and so it's so insensitive, but we don't know. We're just ignorant sometimes to the feelings, and so I think that's good, especially in the church. We're sometimes the worst sinners with some of these do not and do's. So yeah, keep going. Sorry.
I think the last one that we had is, which we already referenced, but don't share that you're pregnant in a group setting.
Yeah, send a text or phone call or something ahead of time, especially if you're close to the person. Like if it's you don't really know the person, then maybe you don't have to worry about it as much. But if you do know the person and are close to them, go ahead and send that message. That's good. And I think the last thing is sometimes people don't want to ask, how are you doing? Because they're afraid, I'm going to make you have a bad day or stir feelings up or something like that. 99% of the time, it's something that we have thought about in the last half hour. You're not going to stir things up, and we really will appreciate the opportunity to talk with someone who cares about it.
Man, that's good. So helpful. Thanks for that. So your story, the rest of your journey, you guys want to share like where God's brought you, where you're at this point, and what you're continuing to do about this?
Yeah, so we went through about 2.5 years of infertility, which that sounds like it's just like we went through 2.5 years, but that's about 32 months, 32 times going through this. And we we went to prayer meetings. Our friends were praying for us, but we had some really close friends that we met up with, and they said, has anyone prayed over you specifically? And we said, no one's really actually prayed over us, laid hands on us. And they said, okay, we're going to do it right now. We're going to pray for you right now. And they got their kids and they laid hands on us and they prayed for us. And then that next month we found out that we were pregnant with our son, John.
Yeah, and that was Father's Day of 2014 when CCC was having chocolate-covered bacon for fathers, and Diane told me I needed to go get chocolate-covered bacon, and I refused just in case people in our small group might see me and wonder, why is he getting the bacon?
Gotcha.
And then after John, there's a 4-year gap. And so we did experience secondary infertility and it just started all over again. And I was so thankful that we had Hannah's prayer because I was leading it the whole time, but then I was going through it a second time. And so to be able to meet with those women and process and just start the whole journey all over again. And John was really asking to have a baby. He wanted to have a baby in the family. And I was like, buddy, I can't do anything about it, but we can pray. And so John and I, we just stopped and we prayed for a baby. And then we found out that same month that we were pregnant.
Oh, how cool.
It was just 2 big miracles and answers to prayer. And that's our story.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And you work with a ton of women in Hannah's prayer that's probably not, their story.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes we provide it as hey, and here's the recipe, but I think saying it out loud, talking out loud about these things is what helps bitterness not start to seep in, because everyone has a different story. Everyone's on a different path in this journey. But I think when we just isolate ourselves and we don't talk about it, we don't say it out loud, we can really start to build some sores that aren't being having surgery on them, and it becomes dangerous and explosive, and our hearts aren't really fostered in a good way through that. So,
and then the one other thing that I thought about to talk about is miscarriage and infertility get lumped together a lot, and miscarriage can be sometimes a side effect of infertility, but they're not the same thing. And both require compassion, but one does need to think about if you know someone or have someone who's dealing with miscarriage, that is a different topic and a different thing to process through and work through, and maybe needs different counseling or different help to work through.
That's so good.
And on the definitely don't say, well, at least you can get pregnant. At least you know you can get pregnant if someone's been going through infertility and a miscarriage. Like, that is so painful for people I know that have experienced that, because they're already wrestling with it.
So next steps, we'd love to, like, for people that this is their story, they're wrestling, through this. Where's Hannah's prayer happen? How does it happen? How can people get in contact with either of you? They could send us an email and we could put them in contact with you. But I'd love to know when Hannah's prayer happens, how someone gets plugged into it, and go from there, just to give information for people.
Yeah, we're a smaller group here, and we meet on Tuesday nights at 7:30. And if you want to go ahead and contact the church, and then they can put you in contact with me. Okay. And we meet on the first and third Tuesdays. But since it's such a touchy topic, like, sometimes the girls just are like, no, I don't want to meet tonight, like, and they don't even want to process. So we're kind of like definitely get in contact with me to find out if the group's going to meet that night. But we usually meet at least once a month.
Yeah. And Russ, if someone gets in contact with us, sends us an email, and as a guy, would you be willing to sit down?
So Hannah's Prayer, if it's not clear, is a group for married women. Yeah. And I am not a married woman, so I am not a part of it. But yeah, if there are guys who need to talk about this, definitely get in touch. And if we need to start a group, I'm sure that the church will be supportive of that.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And if you want to hear from us, we have a podcast.
Yeah.
And it's total silliness. And Russ does not want me to promote it, but I'm going to, because we are at a guy, a girl, and their kids. And we talk about a girl's topic, a guy's topic, and a kid's topic. And it's totally
and no
unedited.
One should listen to it.
It's really fun.
Well, we'll see who pays the most for the editing. And
if you
we'll
cut
either
us
talk
out?
about it or not. Yeah.
Oh.
Totally kidding. Well, hey, seriously, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for sharing your story about a sensitive topic. Thanks for being willing to just be here and be a resource for people, and to kind of open up this and have this conversation that is, unfortunately, a little bit too taboo. I know I've learned a lot, from conversation with you, and so it's been a blessing. So.
All right, well, thanks, Rachel and Alex, for having that conversation. It's really interesting to hear from that perspective. I mean, it's someone, I didn't personally deal with infertility, so it's good to hear these stories, and it really helps you kind of form empathy around the situation.
Yeah, for me, that same story, and I was fortunate to meet with them before we even had that conversation, and have learned so much just about my own ignorance toward it, not like hatefulness or not, but just how I've made things awkward before. And it got me thinking back, oh man, the things maybe I've said in the past, or like I shared on there, the ways I get really excited to share things in my life. And so I'm grateful for conversations like that to sharpen me as like a follower of Jesus, as a pastor. I'm obviously, you guys that are listening to this know I'm not perfect. And so, it was great.
Yeah, I think it was really good for me, because I actually have some friends that do struggle with this, and it's just kind of awkward, and I never know how to enter in conversation with them, and I want to know what they're struggling with and what they're going through, but then I don't feel like I understand, so then I don't want to engage in that conversation. So it's really good to have an open, honest conversation with them, and really get to hear kind of the behind the scenes of what's going on, and it'll kind of help me engage more in those conversations with others that I know. So
I think fertility is such, everybody has some kind of fertility experience in their life. And it's such a sensitive topic, just because you really don't know what people are going through. And so I really appreciated just her kind of highlighting those different experiences both of them did. I think when you've never experienced something, or had somebody that has experienced something, then you really don't know how the things that you say, and even the things that we do sometimes, affect other people, and can maybe trigger them, or just bring up some thoughts or some memories that are painful for people. And so I just think that the wisdom she had to share just about what to say, what not to say, and when to engage in those conversations, particularly when you are in a close relationship with somebody that's when you can have those conversations. Hey, are you thinking about having kids? How many kids do you want? And then especially if somebody opens up to you, being willing to have a conversation further than that with that person. But when you have just an acquaintance type of relationship with people, being more sensitive to the idea that, like, I don't really know what this is like for you. So I just think she had a lot of great wisdom about that. And I thought that was a really, really good thing.
Yeah, I really love how she did bring up, if you don't know them that well, then don't bring it up at all. Because I think sometimes Christians, we just have this assumption if someone's married, like their next step is going to be to have kids. So even if you don't know them that well, you just feel like you can assume, oh, that's probably what they're going to do. So you can bring that conversation up. But if you really don't know them that well, then you have no idea what they're going through or what their next steps are.
And the church is shaped in a big way around the nuclear family and ministries towards that. And so sometimes unintentionally, because we shape it around that and God's design and don't consider the ramifications of the fall of man and all of the stuff that's caused inside of life, unfortunately, we can be triggering that without even knowing, and then not being willing to have those conversations or get super offended. You know, if somebody does have that conversation, they share their experience with us and how it hurt them. Sometimes we just want to, like, maybe bash them with the Bible and throw it. Well, you know, we just taught the Bible. We just taught what God, said, and fill our quiver with arrows and things like that without really being sensitive. And so my hope and one of the learnings I've had as a pastor is just to lead that with more sensitivity. I work with a lot of young adults who, some do have kids and some that I don't even know are struggling with this. And how do I continue to love people well in the middle of this? How do I continue to faithfully, like, preach and help equip families, yet at the same time care for individuals?
Yeah, I think it's difficult too, just because the idea of having a family when it comes from a Christian perspective is always kind of, it's a very poetic thing. It's always like, God knew you before you were born and, like, all this stuff, and it's just a miracle. This miracle's growing in you. And, like, when that's the language around it and someone isn't fertile, then it's like, well, okay, well, then there must be something, wrong with me further than just a physical thing. Like, maybe I'm not being spiritual enough. Maybe my spiritual life isn't right or something like that. And all this stuff starts to get added onto it, and people can get maybe not intentionally judgmental about it, but almost in a passive way. Like, oh, well, you need to get your things in order or whatever. And when you hear this conversation about how they had, you go to all these doctor's appointments, there's so much science, I guess you would call it, involved in trying to get pregnant. It kind of takes that magic away from it all. And so I think sometimes from a Christian perspective, it's hard to process that, because you just want to accept that it's just kind of more just, oh, hey, it just happens, and you're married, so you're gonna, like you said, Rachel, you're gonna have babies. It's just inevitable. And so sometimes I think it's easy for people to start to feel bad about themselves, even in their own faith, because they're like, well, I must not be adding up to these other Christians around me. And you even heard some of that sentiment when they would say, why, like, we're in a good position to have kids. Why wouldn't God, bless us with children, but yet bless others with children? And I think, in some ways, I heard that and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, okay, but we just, some people have babies and some don't. It's, like you said, the fallen world we live in, it's just the product of that. And God doesn't just reward us for good behavior. That's not the reality we live in as Christians. But
and there's so many distinctions. I'm glad they brought it up, because I didn't know about infertility, secondary infertility. I think, like she said, sometimes infertility and miscarriages get lumped together. When we even had Carly on here, way back in the fall, and she shared about something that sometimes gets lumped with miscarriage, but she shared about us having a stillborn, which that's even vastly different than miscarriage. And so there's so many different things that sometimes we just kind of lump together, but the feelings and the emotions and all of that are different. And so we have to treat them, differently, and just have an awareness of each of those, because I think it helps us grow as people, helps us grow in our love for people and our ability to care for people. So I love that distinction that they brought up, and how all consuming it is. I've just never imagined how much it consumes so many decisions that you're making about your future, about your money, about all of those types of things. And so I think it's easy for us to not even think about that. And so at least it is for me. And so I'm so grateful that they brought that up for people to hear.
Great perspective. Anybody else have anything to add? No takeaways. No other takeaways. Sorry. Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. It's been educational. I feel like I learned a lot, and it was great to hear from them. Thanks to newcomers for joining us. Thanks for you guys being here. Thanks for everybody listening. If you want to reach out to us, you can do that on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.